100 diners froze when the millionaire threw the glass of water and yelled in the waitress's face, "You nobody!" But just one sentence, she replied. Calm, yet cutting, left him speechless. Can you believe that just one sentence can change the destiny of two people living at opposite ends of the world? Read until the end, because the truth behind that one sentence will keep you hooked. Maya, you're early today. Can you cover this shift for me? I have a terrible stomachache. The colleague's voice was low but rushed, echoing in the cramped locker room of Le Papin restaurant. Maya looked at her briefly and gave a slight nod. She was used to it. Often when someone requested time off, she would take the shift. At 28, she was no stranger to having to struggle just to keep going. She was a single mother, working 2 jobs simultaneously, by day. She taught children at a small community center in Queens, where the smell of crayons and the sound of children's laughter helped her forget the pressure of rent. By night, she wore the apron of Le Papin restaurant, tied her hair back neatly, and put on a polite smile, which wasn't always genuine. All of it was just to provide for her 5-year-old daughter, Lila, who still waited by the window for her mother to return home every evening. Tonight's shift was different from most. Le Papin was hosting a VIP at table 9. Adrian Westwood, CEO of the Westwood Group, a billionaire so notoriously arrogant and demanding that no one in the restaurant wanted to serve him. But Maya had no choice. The atmosphere at Le Papin was thick with the aroma of red wine and the superficial luxury built on wealth during the peak hours. The clinking of silverware against porcelain plates was just a faint background noise, blending with the low voices of people in suits, discussing contracts and stocks. The yellow lights cast a warm glow on the polished silverware, creating a false sense of comfort, enough for the rich to believe the world around them was perfectly stable. Maya moved quickly past the rows of tables, her serving tray held level at her hip. She had been trained to move invisibly, without making a sound or disturbing any of the guests here. She placed the glass of warm water on table 9. A thin wisp of steam rose, dissipating into the cool air. Adrian Westwood sat there. He didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the leather menu. His posture relaxed, as if the existence of others was merely a faint backdrop to the chair he occupied. His charcoal grey suit hugged his shoulders. His cuff revealed a thin Patek Philippe watch, its cold metallic sheen reflecting under the yellow light. His dark brown hair was slicked back neatly, a few strands of grey mixed in, which didn't age him, but only sharpened his commanding appearance. His face was square, his jawline distinct, his nose high and rigid, his lips pressed into a straight line, the expression of a man more accustomed to being served than to offering thanks, even in silence. He exuded the power of someone who knew the entire room was paying attention to him. His every movement, the way he placed his knife, tilted his wine glass, or slightly raised an eyebrow, carried a cold, unsettling order. Under the pale yellow light, Adrian Westwood resembled a statue sculpted from metal and the habit of giving commands. He didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the leather menu. His posture relaxed, as if the existence of others was merely a faint backdrop to the chair he occupied. Next time, his voice was deep and decisive. Remember to keep the temperature moderate. I don't like the water too hot. The remark was soft, but sharp as a knife. Maya clenched her try. She knew well. Warm water was the standard. But people like him always needed something to demonstrate their power. At a nearby table, Jack, her colleague, glanced over and shook his head. Maya sought the manager's eye, who merely tilted his head, signaling, "Just bear with it." She stood still for a moment, trying to keep her breathing steady. Hair, scuffed shoes, the cheap, flaking watch strap, the hem of her skirt. She had mended herself with mismatched thread. Every small detail betrayed a life of struggling that wasn't enough. Today was the 27th. 3 days left until the deadline. $800 for rent in Queens, she told herself. like a silent prayer. Just get through today. Maya. Just one more day to pay the rent. Adrian slightly raised his hand. Without looking at her, the tablecloth is crooked. She leaned down, using her fingertips to adjust the edge of the cloth, making a perfectly square corner. A minute later, he picked up the silver spoon. Inspecting it under the light, this spoon is scratched. Replace it. She exchanged it for a shiny new spoon, her heart beating faster with every moment. As she placed the glass of burgundy wine down, he leaned back slightly. His voice lowered. Cold as steel. Don't let your breath touch my glass. The pettiness of his control was cruel. Maya bowed her head, careful to the point of shrinking her shoulders, avoiding even the air around him. Yes. Sir. Yes. Sir. Yes. Sir. 3 times. Each time her voice was softer, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Sweat beaded on her wrists. The chandelier light made her face feel hot. In her mind, she kept counting. Just get through today. A middle-aged customer at a nearby table whispered, "Poor girl. That Westwood guy always finds a way to bully the staff." Adrian heard it. He turned his head, his sharp gaze silencing them instantly. Maya remained standing straight, looking at the mirrored glass across the room. In it, she saw herself, trembling and small, yet standing firm. When the main course was served, Maya summoned all her courage, her voice soft but clear. "Sir, the chef has a special salmon with passion fruit today. It might suit your palate." Clang! The silver knife struck the plate hard. The harsh sound echoed, slashing the silence in two. Adrian looked up, his gaze cold as a blade. "I don't pay money to hear kitchen staff advise me on what to eat. Do you know who I am?" The air in the dining hall seemed to solidify. Maya took a breath, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes did not waver. "I am just trying to do my job well. Sir." Her voice wasn't raised, nor was it trembling, only a fragile sense of self-respect, trying to survive. Adrian lowered his voice, his words heavy as lead. "You are just a nobody." In that moment, Maya lifted her head. She looked straight into his eyes, her voice soft but firm, like a streak of light in the darkness. "You can buy everything on this menu." She paused for a beat, taking a deep breath. "But you cannot buy kindness." The space went completely silent. A grey-haired customer in the far corner faintly clapped just one sound, weak but resounding. Then a few others followed. Adrian glanced around, his face darkening. He pushed his chair back violently, the screeching sound jarring. Pulling a gold-plated business card from his wallet, he threw it onto the table next to the now cool glass of water. "You will never work in New York again." He turned and walked away. The scent of expensive cologne lingered, the only trace of power, when the heart was empty. Maya remained standing, her hand gripping the tray, her heart pounding until she felt choked. She knew she had just sacrificed everything. In the corner, the young customer, the first one to applaud, gently placed his phone on the table. The screen was still on. The chandelier light reflected in the glass of water. The warm water was now completely cold. But Maya didn't know that this very cool glass of water was about to shake the entire city. After that night, Maya returned to her small apartment to her daughter's weary anticipation. Lila had fallen asleep on the old sofa, her hand still clutching the ragged teddy bear she always carried when worried. Maya placed her bag down, leaning over to kiss her daughter's forehead gently. The child's soft curls mingled with the scent of cheap soap, making her chest ache. It had been an eventful night, so much so that the warmth of that kiss was the only thing reminding her she was still alive. She lay on her side on the sunken sofa, her uniform still faintly smelling of wine and kitchen smoke. She hadn't changed, hadn't removed her hair clip. Everything on her seemed to carry the lingering tremors of Le Papon, the harsh lights, the clinking silverware, and the final sentence that had cost her job. In the quiet darkness, Lila's steady breathing was soft. Maya gently closed her eyes. But her mind couldn't leave the luxurious room where she had dared to say what she had only ever dared to think. The streetlights shone through the window, illuminating her neatly placed scuffed shoes by the door. She looked at them for a long time, then softly sighed. "I wonder if I'll have the strength to go to work tomorrow morning," she whispered to herself. The voice echoed in the darkness, soft as a breath, yet heavy with months of pent-up pressure. Maya only managed to snatch 2 hours of sleep. The phone rang, shrill and tearing through the fragile silence of the small apartment. She reached for it, her eyes barely open. "Maya, you're famous," Tina, her best friend, exclaimed in a panicked voice. "Go online. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Everyone's talking about you." Maya jumped up, her heart pounding more with confusion than excitement. "Which clip?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Tina sent a link." Maya clicked it open. The screen lit up, reflecting her exhausted face, her eyes still red from lack of sleep. On the screen, it was her in last night's uniform saying, "You can buy everything on this menu, but you cannot buy kindness." That trembling voice now echoed in the cramped room. Maya looked at herself in the video, as if looking at a stranger, the woman who had dared to say what she only dreamed of having the courage to utter. In his 50th floor office in Manhattan, Adrian Westwood sat motionless. On the large screen, the video played on loop, the camera angle slightly shaky, but perfectly capturing his expression. A red headline scrolled below. "Westwood CEO humiliates employee, massive backlash." His face reflected the cold light of the screen. Gone was his usual confidence. Only a stunned vulnerability remained. The door burst open. Ethan Westwood, his cousin, walked in neat, polite. "Cousin, the news is spreading too fast. We need a delicate response. You should stay silent for a few days. Let me handle the media." Ethan finished speaking and left, a faint, razor-thin smile briefly twitching at the corner of his mouth, hinting at an unrevealed calculation. Adrian remained seated, a glass of whiskey in his hand. On the screen, the image of the small waitress lifting her head to look straight at him played over and over. Each time he watched, her gaze made his chest heavier. He recalled, that afternoon, after a long meeting, Ethan had suggested they go to Le Papon for dinner. Before he stepped inside, Ethan had given him a seemingly absurd piece of advice. "Cousin," Ethan had said softly, "everyone at Le Papon knows you are a demanding customer, but I hear their staff often show attitude toward wealthy guests lately. If you want them to respect you, you have to maintain your position. Don't let them look down on you." Adrian remembered nodding. Almost instinctively, "Maintain your position." That sentence now rang in his head like a curse. He realized from the moment he stepped into the restaurant, he hadn't been himself, but merely playing the role of the powerful figure Ethan wanted him to be. The glass of whiskey in his hand trembled slightly. A drop of liquor fell onto the table, spreading like the stain of an irreparable mistake. Suddenly, Maya's phone rang again. She didn't know which call it was in the day, and she intended not to answer. But the name displayed made her stop. It was the manager of Le Papon. "Maya, I know you didn't mean to, but this is a crisis. Reservations are being cancelled in droves. You should take a temporary leave. Wait for things to calm down." His voice was cold, smooth, as if reading from a crisis management playbook. Maya remained silent, then hung up. She walked to the coat rack, took off her apron, and carefully rolled it up. A small action, but as heavy as closing the last door to stability. In the corner of the room, little Lila was sitting on the floor, diligently coloring. She looked up, holding her mother's phone, the screen showing the video. "Mommy," the child asked softly, "is that you in the phone?" Maya froze. She walked over and sat down beside her, Lila's small arm wrapped around her mother's neck, her eyes clear and serious. I think you were brave. Mom. Maya hugged her daughter tightly. She had been afraid the child would be ashamed. But the only thing she received was a child's pride. She whispered. Her voice choked. I just said what was right. Leela. Just what was right. That evening, the rain began to drizzle. Maya put on a thin raincoat and went to the convenience store to buy milk. She pulled her hood low, walking quickly past a group of teenagers sheltering from the rain. From their phone, her voice rang out, "But you cannot buy kindness." She bowed her head, her heart aching. Shame, fear, and the helplessness of having her private life exposed to the world. At the checkout counter, an older woman standing behind her quietly said, "I watched it. You were right. Don't be ashamed of what is right." Her voice was gentle, but it warmed the whole rainy night. Maya merely bowed her head in thanks, a trembling smile on her face. As she walked out, the rain grew heavier, mixing with the tears she couldn't hide. At the same time, at the Westwood Group headquarters, an emergency meeting was underway. Stock prices dropped 8%. The company image is collapsing. A shareholder stated. Ethan stood up, his voice calm. My cousin is exhausted. I will temporarily take over to stabilize the media. All eyes turned to him, as if it were the only logical thing to do. Adrian sat silently at the head of the table, holding his whiskey glass. The drop of liquor fell onto the glass surface, spreading into a slick spot, just as his honor was spreading thin, unable to be gathered back. After receiving the call from the manager, Maya thought for a long time, her heart heavy as lead. She opened her old laptop and wrote a brief letter. I am resigning immediately to prevent further damage to the restaurant's reputation. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. Sincerely, Maya. She reread it and pressed send. Outside the window, the sound of the night train echoed, distant and mournful, like the end of a long road. The news continued on the TV, but Maya turned it off just as the headline scrolled past. She didn't know, didn't care. She just looked toward the bed, where little Lila was fast asleep, her curls spread across the pillow. Maya gently pulled the blanket over her, her hand resting for a moment on the child's forehead. She didn't know that the very act of protecting her daughter last night had inadvertently ignited a massive power storm. Outside the window, car lights reflected on the glass, flashing incessantly like the heartbeat of an impending thunderstorm. And in the heart of that sleepless city, two people who thought they would never meet again were bound together by a video clip lasting a mere 13 seconds. Adrian Westwood's penthouse apartment in Manhattan. The vast apartment was now lit only by the faint glow of a desk lamp, casting light on his tired face. Adrian hadn't slept for 3 nights. On the desk, the TV was still on, showing a special report. The Westwood Group is facing the most serious crisis in its history. Stocks are in freefall. Investors are pulling out en masse. While the public calls this the punishment of arrogance, the screen flickered. His image was cut alongside the moment the waitress looked up straight into the camera. That gaze haunted him not because of the humiliation, but because it held something he had lost long ago. The courage of someone who speaks the truth. Adrian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His phone lit up with messages from lawyers, shareholders, and partners all wanting to distance themselves from him. The people who once called him a genius were now silent, or publicly cutting ties. In that moment of chaos, only one person remained: Ethan. His cousin. Ethan had called immediately when the incident broke, his voice gentle but firm. Cousin, let me handle the media. Don't let anyone see you weak right now. Just stay silent. I'll take care of the rest. Adrian looked at the screen, reading the message again. A short message, but in this storm, it was the only thing that made him feel he wasn't completely alone. He looked up at the night sky outside the window, the city lights reflecting on the glass like countless fragments of shattered belief. Deep down, he no longer believed in shareholders. the media, or reputation. Only Ethan remained, the only person he thought would never turn his back. It wasn't because it cost him power, but because it made him remember who he used to be, the man who had started from nothing, who had once been treated by others the way he had treated her. Since the incident broke, Adrian had barely spoken to anyone. Ethan took temporary control, appearing in the media as a savior. Everything happened unusually fast. Financial reports were released earlier than expected. Media response documents were drafted just hours after the video went viral. A few strategic partners withdrew, citing lack of confidence. Yet the emails confirming their withdrawal were sent from Westwood Group's internal servers. Adrian didn't want to believe what he was thinking. But the more he looked, the more everything seemed to slip away, as if it had been prepared in advance. And at the end of every trace was the same name, Ethan. Meanwhile, in Queens, Maya was starting over. After resigning from Le Papin, she got a job washing cups at a small coffee shop near St. Clair Hospital. Night shift, fewer customers, less noise, and enough time for her to pick up Lila every morning. She was no longer afraid of the phone ringing, but still flinched whenever she heard the word video. She didn't regret speaking up, but still carried the guilt of having spoken in front of a camera, something decent people sometimes pay a price for. That evening, as she was recording her expenses, Tina sent her a message. Check the news. Westwood is being overthrown. But looking at him on the news, I don't think he looks like the villain everyone says he is. Maya didn't reply. She just looked at the phone screen. Seeing Adrian's deeply sunken eyes, a proud man who had fallen from his throne, she turned off the phone, quietly saying to herself, perhaps everyone has a moment of losing themselves. At the same time, Adrian sat in his old office, the desk lamplight reflecting on a stack of unfinished files. The papers were thick, but he stopped at one small detail. His signature was subtly forged on the withdrawal contract with the Samuels Group Investment Fund. He turned on his computer. A series of internal emails opened, sent from the deputy's address, but the time sent coincided exactly with his press conference, meaning someone was manipulating his access. He leaned back in the chair. His hand trembled slightly. Everything he had once considered absolute control now became evidence of a perfectly executed manipulation. The office door gently opened. His trusted assistant, Danielle Cooper, walked in, holding a folder. They are demanding a full audit of your personal assets, and Ethan has been officially appointed as the interim CEO. Adrian nodded slightly. I guessed as much. Daniel placed the folder on the desk, hesitated for a second, then quietly said, you should take a break for a few days. Adrian, go to St. Clair. See Mr. Bernard. You still have a place to return to. That night, he drove out of Manhattan. Rain drizzled on the car windshield, blurring the lights into long streaks. Adrian turned on the radio unconsciously. The reporter's voice rang out. Following the scandal, former CEO Westwood has yet to issue a public apology. Sources indicate he is facing serious financial troubles. He turned off the radio, giving a faint smile. Then he remembered Mr. Bernard's words from their last meeting. When you only seek respect, you will forget how to respect others. Now he understood, but he understood too late. At St. Clair, the atmosphere was quiet and smelled of dried lavender. Adrian walked down the hallway, seeing Maya pushing a medicine cart past him. Both stopped. She slightly bowed her head in greeting, her voice calm. Mr. Bernard is waiting for you. There was no anger, no avoidance, only a silence filled with unspoken things. In the patient's room, Mr. Bernard smiled weakly when he saw him. You came. Sit down. Adrian sat down on the familiar wooden chair. They didn't speak for a long time. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The sound of drops intertwined, like the breath of a city that was both tired and resilient. I know my mistake. Bernard, Adrian said, his voice deep. But I don't know where to start over. Mr. Bernard smiled gently. From the truth. Always from the truth. On his way back, Adrian stopped at a small rest area. He took out his phone and opened his inbox. An anonymous message appeared. Sent from an unknown number. Want to know who pushed you down? He frowned slightly, reading on. A second message came immediately after, with just one line, Ethan Westwood. He put the phone down on the table, his heart aching but not from shock. He had sensed it before. The feeling of betrayal didn't arrive like thunder, but slowly, like the rain outside the window, something he had been hearing all night, but only now truly soaked in. Adrian closed his eyes, resting his head on the chair. For the first time in his life, he didn't think about money, reputation, or power. He only thought about a glass of warm water that had gone cold, and the woman who had taught him that kindness once lost cannot be bought back at any price. In the darkness of the small room in Queens, Maya woke up with a start. A cold draft slipped through the crack in the door, making the curtain rustle slightly. Little Lila was fast asleep beside her, her small arm draped over her mother. Maya gently brushed her daughter's hair back, kissing her forehead. Outside, the rain still hadn't stopped. She didn't know that just a few miles away, the man who had once ruined her was awake, listening to the same rain. And in that rain, two people, one who had lost his honor, one who had lost her job, were beginning again. Unintentionally linked. Amidst the city flooded with lights and rumors, a message had sown the seed for the real storm, no longer a media storm, but a storm in the human heart. The morning in the New York suburbs was unusually quiet. The maple trees were dotted with yellow. Dew covered the iron railing, forming transparent drops. On the road leading to St. Clair, the nursing home nestled among the hills, a small silver bus stopped. Maya stepped out, carrying a cloth bag with her uniform and a lunchbox from home. She had been working at St. Clair for a week. Not every place would readily hire someone who used to be a waitress. But the director, an older woman with a quiet voice and a belief in instinct, simply looked into Maya's eyes and said, "Here, we take people whose lives have taken a wrong turn. Like you." From the first day, Maya felt St. Clair was different from anywhere she had known. No pressure, no yelling, only the scent of dried lavender tea, the sound of wheels rolling on the floor, and the weak voices of the elderly calling each other by name. She felt her heart soften. That morning, as Maya brewed tea in the nurse's station, the head nurse smiled and said, "Room 12, mister. Bernard prefers lavender tea instead of coffee. Be careful. He cherishes that teapot." Maya nodded, carrying the tea tray up. She didn't know that this very morning would begin a journey that would change everything in her life. At the same time, in Manhattan, Adrian Westwood sat silently at his desk. The broken piece of glass from last night was still there. He hadn't cleaned it up. The truth about Ethan cut deep. Not just professional betrayal, but betrayal of blood, the one thing he had considered, the only remaining constant in his life. He touched the crack on the glass table. It was the table he and Bernard had designed together years ago, when they were partners. Now Bernard was retired, and he, the man who once thought he stood above the world, had nowhere to return except that very place. That morning, Adrian didn't call his driver. He took his old Mercedes, the car he used for fishing on those rare days, when he still knew how to smile. He drove across the Brooklyn Bridge, light rain drizzling. The city behind him seemed to melt away in the rearview mirror when the car stopped in front of the dark green iron gate of St. Clair. Adrian sat still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. No private security, no press cameras, only the rustling of leaves, the smell of damp earth, and a faint antiseptic scent. He stepped out, holding a bunch of dried lavender, an old gift Bernard always loved. The night shift nurse recognized him immediately. "Mr. Westwood, it's been a long time since you visited." "Mr." Bernard still asks about you. Adrian briefly bowed his head. I know. I've been too busy with things that weren't worth being busy with. Perhaps I forgot the only person who ever taught me what was right. His voice was hoarse, containing a kind of weariness that power could never conceal. Room 12 was in the corner of the hallway, overlooking a small garden. Mr. Bernard sat by the window, the morning light illuminating his thin hands. When Adrian walked in, the old man just turned his head slightly, his gaze as calm as if he had anticipated this visit. You came, he said. The storm finally passed, didn't it? Adrian sat down on the hard wooden chair beside the bed. I did everything. Bernard worked, was ruthless, accumulated power, just so no one would look down on me again. And now no one respects me. Mr. Rapp. Bernard looked at him for a long time, then gently smiled. When you only seek respect, Adrian, you forget how to respect others. That's the price of letting fear control you. Adrian bowed his head. There was no reproach in Bernard's voice, only a gentle tolerance, light as a breath. In the hallway, Maya pushed the medicine cart past. She was carrying a tea tray for the room next door. But when she heard the familiar voice emanating from room 12, her steps paused. Her heart pounded against her neck. There was no mistaking it, that voice. Deep and firm. The one that had cost her job. She stood still for a moment, gripping the tea tray, then forced herself to continue. St. Clair was the last place she wanted to lose. But fate always finds a way to test people. When she came back out to fetch more supplies, Adrian had just stepped into the hallway. They met, less than 2 meters apart. There was no rushed breathing, no anger. Just 2 pairs of eyes, both weary and having lost too much. Maya bowed her head, her voice low and even. I just work here. Adrian gently nodded, his voice deeper but softer than ever before. I know. In that moment, the world around them seemed to quiet. No one was a winner or a loser anymore. Only 2 people trying to survive amidst the wreckage of their own lives. Maya placed the tea tray on the hallway table, but her hand trembled slightly, causing water to spill over the edge of the cup. Adrian instinctively pulled a tissue from his suit pocket and offered it to her. Be careful. It's hot. She briefly looked at him, surprised. The gesture was simple, but too ordinary to be fake. She gently took the tissue, bowed her head in thanks, and continued her work. From inside the room, Mr. Bernard had seen everything. A faint smile spread across his lips. They both looked tired, he said, his voice hoarse. Perhaps God is about to teach them something about kindness, or at least about silence. The remark fell into the void, soft yet profound, leaving Adrian standing still for a long time before he left. Just after he left the institute, Bernard quietly called the head nurse over. That new attendant. He looked toward the hallway where Maya had just disappeared. Her gaze. It reminds me of someone. The young woman from years ago. Sir? The nurse asked. Bernard nodded slowly. Many years ago, there was a girl like that. She made Adrian choose the path of decency. But then he lost her, just like one loses their guiding light. He looked out the window, where the thin rain was falling. Perhaps God is giving him a chance to find that light again this time, in a different form. Outside, the rain had stopped. Maya was helping an elderly man move in a wheelchair onto the porch. The sky was clear. The first rays of sun pierced through the clouds, reflecting on the maple trees. She opened the old umbrella, sheltering the old man, even though there was no more rain. A gentle breeze blew through, causing a few lavender petals from the bouquet in Bernard's room to fly out and fall onto Maya's hand. She looked up, gazing toward the road, where a silver Mercedes had just left the gate. She didn't know that the man, the one who had once derailed her life, would once again change her destiny. In an unexpected way, amidst the faint scent of lavender at St. Clair, 2 people who seemed to have nothing left to lose had unintentionally become each other's last hope. The morning at St. Clair began with the crackling radio in the nurse's station. Maya organized the small medicine bottles, her hands moving deftly. But her mind was still hazy. The announcer's voice rang out through the static. The scandal at Le Papon restaurant is leading to a wider investigation. The Westwood Group Board of Directors has formally requested CEO Adrian Westwood be temporarily suspended following suspicions of internal fraud and financial leaks. Maya's hand paused mid-action. She looked out the window, where the morning mist still clung to the trees. "A moment later," she whispered softly, as if speaking to herself. "No one falls unless they have stood too high." Her voice was gentle, without gloating, just the empathy of someone who understood loss. In the afternoon, the sky turned grey again. Adrian returned to St. Clair. No more escort cars, no bodyguards, just him. A paper bag containing a few newspapers and some old books. He walked from the parking lot, his shoes muddy, his coat frayed at the cuffs. In the patient's room, Mr. Bernard looked weaker. His face was drawn, but his eyes were still bright. Adrian sat down on the familiar wooden chair, looking at his adoptive father's thin hands. "If I lose everything, Bernard," he asked softly, "will anyone still want to hear me speak?" "If you learn to listen first," Bernard replied, his voice hoarse. "People will listen to you later." A long silence followed. Adrian bowed his head, his fingers tightly gripping the newspaper in his pocket. The headlines on the front page read, "Former CEO Adrian Westwood, a collapsed symbol of power." But beneath it, he only saw a man trying to learn humility. When he reached the hallway, Adrian found Maya sitting and recording medication logs. A pencil was tucked behind her ear. A few strands of hair had escaped onto her forehead. She looked up, gently nodding. "The old man is stable, just a little weaker." Adrian offered a faint smile. "Thank you for still treating him kindly." Maya closed her notebook. "Sometimes," she said, "taking care of others helps us forget the things we can't fix about ourselves." The remark made Adrian pause. For the first time, he found her words not as a lecture, but as a gentle form of forgiveness. They stood there in the softly lit hallway, two people who had been rivals on a night of humiliation, now sharing a strange and peaceful stillness. That evening, Maya helped Mr. Bernard eat soup. Adrian stayed as well. He awkwardly cut the bread, crumbs falling onto the tray. When he tried to fork a piece of meat, the slice of bread flew off the plate and onto the floor. Maya laughed, a genuine, rare laugh. "You act like you've never done manual labor." Adrian shrugged. "I used to think only money kept everything in order. Now I can't even cut a slice of bread properly." Mr. Bernard looked at the two of them, smiling kindly. "You two," he said, his voice tinged with amusement, "are like children. But perhaps this is the most decent dinner I've had in years." All three laughed. The laughter dissolved into the warm air, blending with the faint scent of lavender. It was the first time Adrian felt a meal could have flavor without wine, the taste of relief and tolerance. "A moment later," Maya's phone vibrated in her scrub's pocket. A message from Tina. "Check the news. Everything is falling apart. His relative was behind the video incident. They are investigating Ethan Westwood." Maya read it. Her heart briefly shaken. She looked up. Adrian was still sitting beside the bed, his gaze distant. He didn't know, and she didn't say anything. She looked at him for a long time, the man who had cost her her job, now sitting there, tired like a child who had just learned to admit fault. A strange emotion welled up. Not anger, not gloating, just a silent pity. Perhaps, she thought, loneliness is what makes people so cruel. She gently placed the teacup on the table, saying nothing more. That action, simple as it was, contained more than words of comfort. The night deepened. Adrian left. The night wind swept through the hallway, stretching his shadow across the tiled floor. As he walked out the gate of St. Clair, drizzle began to fall. Around the corner, a black car was parked silently. Inside, Ethan Westwood sat behind the tinted glass, talking on the phone. Let him continue going there and seeing her. His voice was cold. She is his new weakness. When Adrian trusts someone, he destroys himself. Very convenient. The driver remained silent. Ethan glanced out, headlights reflected on the hospital glass, where the two figures, Adrian and Maya, had just passed by. A fragile image, but enough for him to see life returning to the eyes of the man he intended to destroy. He squinted. Cold. If that's the light, he muttered. I just need to extinguish it. Inside the institute, Maya turned off the light in the nurse's station. She walked out onto the balcony, looking at the lavender garden soaked in rain. In her mind, Mr. Bernard's words echoed. Perhaps God is about to teach them something about kindness. She didn't fully understand the meaning, but she had a premonition that the real storm had not yet passed. Outside, the wind began to strengthen, carrying the smell of damp earth and cold air. In the distance, the black car lights of Ethan turned on. Gliding past the St. Clair gate, the night closed like a curtain, preparing for a new test, where kindness, once again, would have to stand against temptation and hatred. In the rustling wind of the rainy night, two weary souls found a little peace, but at that very moment, somewhere, someone was watching, waiting for the opportunity to shatter the most fragile thing. Trust. Late evening. The nurse's station at St. Clair was bathed in pale yellow light, reflecting off the thin, shimmering curtain. Maya was washing cups, the sound of running water steady. On the small TV mounted in the corner, the news echoed throughout the silent space. The Westwood Group is conducting an internal investigation following the prolonged scandal. She deliberately ignored it. But the anchor's voice was too clear. The screen changed. Ethan Westwood's face appeared amidst a cluster of reporters, looking bright, composed, his eyes fixed on the camera. My cousin is taking a temporary leave to focus on his health after a long period of intense work, Ethan said, his voice smooth. I will temporarily take over to ensure market stability. Camera flashes went off like rain. Maya set the cup down, staring at the screen. She didn't know much about the financial world, but the man's eyes sent a chill down her spine. Too flat, too calm, like a lake concealing a muddy bottom. The way he looks into the lens, she thought, isn't confidence. It's power that no longer needs to be hidden. At the same time, in his old apartment in Brooklyn, Adrian Westwood sat silently in front of his laptop. The room was empty. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. He reopened the old video, the one that had caused his life to collapse. Each time he replayed it, his heart felt tighter. In the glittering reflection of the glass of wine on the dining table, he suddenly stopped. A faint shape appeared, a hand holding a phone, a wrist wearing a solid gold watch. Unmistakable. It was the watch he had given Ethan for his 30th birthday. The watch he had once said, "This is what will remind you that family is more reliable than anything." Adrian jumped up, but instead of anger, he was silent. I once taught others to be cautious, he whispered, but I was never cautious about the greed of my own family. The sentence fell into the cold void. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. The night lights shone on his face, a face once praised, now bearing deep lines of regret. I let power blind me, and I let family ties become a tool, he murmured, almost confessing to himself. At St. Clair, Maya was bringing medicine into Mr. Prosopladus. Bernard's room, the nightlight illuminated the beige wall softly. Adrian sat there, quietly, his hands clasped together. Maya paused slightly, but then continued, her voice soft and gentle. The old man is sleeping peacefully. I just checked his blood pressure. Adrian nodded. As Maya placed the tea glass on the table, he spoke, his voice hoarse. I know who did it. She looked at him, The yellow light reflected his conflicted eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Adrian sighed, slightly bowing his head. "I don't know yet. I only know I don't want to be the person I used to be. I don't want to retaliate with cruelty as I did all my life." Maya was silent for a moment. She placed her hand on the table, not looking at him, her voice calm like a prayer. "Then don't. Sometimes, simply not retaliating is strong enough." Adrian looked at the small hand placed next to his, a hand that had once trembled with fear in front of him, now tranquil, like someone granting him salvation. In that moment, he understood. True strength lay not in power, but in the mercy he had once lost. Late night, St. Clair was so quiet, one could hear the wind whistling through the hallway. Maya and Adrian helped the night nurse fold blankets for the patients. Adrian was clumsy. He folded the blanket crookedly, leaving the corner of the pillow exposed. Maya chuckled softly, her laugh as fragile as falling glass. "You act as if you've never touched anything soft before." "Perhaps that's true," Adrian replied. He looked down at his hands that had signed contracts worth billions of dollars, but had never known how to fold a blanket neatly. Now, as his fingers gently touched the edge of the fabric, he realized there were soft things he had never touched in his life. Kindness, peace. Maya watched him silently. The yellow light shone on his salt and pepper hair, reflecting a vulnerability he no longer hid. She smiled gently. "It's okay. You'll get used to it." Adrian looked up. "Thanks to whom?" "Thanks to the people who are no longer afraid of you." They laughed together, softly, but enough to dispel the haze in both their hearts. When Maya ended her shift and left the institute, the rain began to drizzle. She pulled up her coat. Walking quickly across the yard, a strange man stood by the lamppost, a phone in his hand. He aimed the lens, recording her license plate. She meets him every day now. He spoke into the device. The relationship is getting closer. The closer they are, the easier to control. On the other end of the line, Ethan's voice was deep and cold. "Good. Maintain just enough distance. Don't let her become what he needs." Maya's car lights turned on, shining straight into the curtain of rain. She didn't know that in the darkness, a pair of eyes was watching, not out of hatred, but out of fear of the uncontrollable. Kindness. That night, Adrian stayed awake. On the table, the lavender tea was still warm. He remembered Maya's words, echoing in his head like the last melody remaining in the empty room. Sometimes, simply not retaliating is strong enough. He smiled, nodding gently, as if accepting a lesson he had spent his whole life searching for. Outside, the rain still fell, but for the first time, Adrian did not feel lonely in the sound of the rain. Amidst the quiet rain, someone was learning to forgive, and someone was afraid of the light that had just been kindled in the darkness. Maya arrived back at her apartment in Queens under the rain, her shadow quickly crossing the wet parking lot, unaware that a pair of eyes was following her. Early the next morning, she opened her personal email while drinking cold coffee. The subject line was unremarkable, but the content was brief and cold. "Keep silent if you want to keep your job. Stay away from him." She frowned. This was no longer a threat from Le Papin restaurant. She knew clearly where this tone came from. She did not reply, just clicked and deleted the email. An elderly patient, Mr. Miller, walked past the nurse's station. Noticing Maya, seemed contemplative. "Are you all right? Dear, you look a little tired." Maya smiled lightly. Tiredness had become part of her smile. "I'm just a little tired. Sire, I didn't get enough sleep." At the same time, at St. Clair, Adrian left the institute after visiting Mr. Bernard. He was no longer wearing the watch Ethan was using. The only remaining luxury was his old cashmere coat. As his car rolled out of the gate, he looked in the rearview mirror. A dark sedan, tinted windows, was following at a fixed distance. Adrian stopped at an intersection without traffic lights. The black car stopped too. He scrutinized the driver through the blurred glass. The face was too familiar to be a stranger. A former security employee of the Westwood Group. Adrian muttered it, a bitter smile briefly crossing his lips. How far are you testing me? Ethan? Or are you trying to ensure I never rise again? In the afternoon. The weather softened. Maya was pruning the lavender bushes in the small garden behind the institute. The pleasant scent filled the air. Adrian approached, holding old gardening shears. Awkwardly helping her. I received an email this morning, Maya said softly. Without stopping her work. Someone threatened me. I think it's related to you. Adrian bowed his head, cutting a dry branch. His voice was deep and heavy, no longer commanding. I'm sorry. Maya, I dragged you into this fight. Don't let them scare you. Maya looked at him, her eyes deeper than fear. I'm not afraid of them, Adrian. I'm only afraid you'll forget why you wanted to change. Afraid you'll retaliate the old way. For the first time, she called him Adrian, not distant, not angry. Just the implicit intimacy of two people on the same battle line. A few hours later, night fell upon St. Clair. The emergency alarm sounded. Maya rushed into Mr. Bernard's room. Adrian appeared almost simultaneously, his face pale. Mr. Bernard was breathing weakly, his eyes struggling to find Adrian. Maya and the nurses tried everything to stabilize the situation. When things temporarily calmed down, Mr. Bernard tightly grasped Adrian's hand. My son. His voice was weak, but conveyed a final plea. Don't let hatred decide the rest of your life. Forgive yourself, and then forgive others. Adrian nodded, his eyes welling up. I promise, Bernard. I promise. After everything stabilized, Maya prepared to leave. Outside, heavy rain suddenly poured down. She hurried toward the parking lot. She heard rushed footsteps behind her, not the sound of expensive leather shoes, but the sound of someone running in the rain in rubber soles. She turned sharply. She only saw a figure flash by. A hand grabbed her. The umbrella she was holding fell to the ground, snapping open. The strong impact made her stumble. Her phone fell into a puddle, the screen flashing for a moment. The text message she hadn't managed to send to Adrian appeared clearly under the lightning flash. Adrian, I think I'm being followed. The phone screen flickered, the light reflecting dimly in the puddle, then went dark. She had disappeared. That night, the city seemed to hold its breath. The rainy streets were covered in a cold silver color. In his old apartment, Adrian sat at his desk, the lamp shining down on an unsigned file. The paper before him was blotched with water. He couldn't tell if it was from a leaking roof or his own eyes. The phone vibrated. An unknown number. A distorted voice on the line made him freeze. Your girl is in my hands. If you want to see her, come to basement B, 3 of the old Westwood building, 42nd Street, alone. And don't call the police, or her daughter will receive very bad news. The phrase, her daughter, made the blood in his body run cold. Lila. Adrian dropped the phone. The entire room sank into heavy silence. After a long time, he stood up, took a piece of paper, and handwrote a short letter, leaving it on the desk. Daniel, if I don't return before dawn, check Ethan's camera system and go to the basement of the old building. I don't have much left to lose. But she does. Don't let anyone else be hurt by my mistakes. Signed, Adrian Westwood. He folded the letter, placing it next to Bernard's old pocket watch as a final testament of faith. The rain grew heavier. The old Mercedes rolled through the flooded streets, the wipers screeching steadily like a frantic heartbeat. Adrian no longer thought about power, reputation, or crashing stocks. He only thought of one thing. If he had to pay a price to protect the person who taught him to believe in kindness, he was ready. The old Westwood building emerged in the rain. Towering and isolated, he stepped out of the car, his overcoat heavy with water. Basement B3 was dark as a well. smelling of damp mold and rusty iron. A voice echoed from the darkness, cold and smooth as a finely sharpened blade. "You came, cousin." Ethan stood in the faint light cast by an industrial bulb. His suit was dry, as if the rain could never touch him. "Did you think I did all this for money?" Ethan sneered. "No. I just wanted you to understand what it's like to lose the thing you always despised, human decency." Adrian looked straight at him, his voice hoarse from the rain and suppression. "I understand now, Ethan, but you don't." They stood there, two shadows, one who once held power, one who held ambition, facing each other in the barren space. Between them, the sound of the rain seemed to pass judgment. "I used to admire you," Ethan said, stepping forward, "until I realized you had everything but were still empty. I wanted you to feel, just once, what it's like to be dragged down." Adrian remained silent, his shoulders heavy as stone. "If you want to end it here," he said slowly, "then do it. But don't drag her into it." In that moment, lightning flashed outside the basement door, illuminating his face, tired, but strangely composed. It was the light of a man who had accepted atonement. Ethan was about to say more, but from a distance, the sound of a car stopping abruptly rang out. No sirens, no noise, just a figure in a raincoat walking in, holding the letter Adrian had left behind. Daniel Cooper, his lawyer. "Ethan," Daniel said calmly, his voice steady. "I read the letter. The basement camera still has footage. You won't get away with this." Ethan backed away, his face briefly losing color. He was not caught by violence, but by a belief he had never understood, belief in the truth. He bowed his head, offering a faint smile. "You always have a savior, Adrian." "You don't?" Adrian looked at his cousin, his eyes sadder than hatred. "No one saves you, Ethan. Only you can save yourself. If you still want to." The rain still fell, but the sound had softened. Maya was found in the locked security room, the dim light casting a pale glow on her face. She was breathing, but unconscious due to light sedation. She was taken to St. Clair immediately that night. Early morning. The rain had stopped. The first light of day shone through the window of the nurse's station. Maya opened her eyes, her breath weak, and realized Adrian was sitting by the bed, still wearing the coat soaked with water from the night before. His chin rested on his chest, his hand still tightly held hers. She stirred slightly. He jumped. Looking up, their eyes met no more suspicion, only exhaustion and gratitude. "Did you sit here all night?" she asked softly. "I was afraid if I left, you would disappear again. You don't have to worry about me. I know, but I need to worry, because it's the only thing that makes me feel alive." Maya was silent, then gently placed her hand on his. "You don't need to apologize, Adrian. Just keep the good part of yourself. That's enough." Outside, the wind gently swayed the wet lavender trees. Mr. Bernard was wheeled past the door, smiling weakly when he saw them. "Finally," he said, his voice hoarse, "you have learned what I have believed all my life. A person is truly wealthy only when they know how to protect their humanity." That afternoon, the sky cleared, the first rays of sun after many rainy days shining down on the institute yard. Adrian stepped out onto the porch, no longer wearing a suit jacket, only a thin sweater. Maya walked toward him, holding the old umbrella that had fallen in the storm. She handed it to him, smiling. "Here you go. It's still useful now." Adrian smiled faintly, his voice deeper and warmer than ever. "Perhaps I don't need an umbrella anymore, because my savior wasn't an angel, but someone who dared to speak the truth and was patient enough to wait for me to understand." Maya gently nodded. From a distance, Lila ran toward them, her hair flying in the sun. The child laughed, her pure sound wiping away the darkness of the past days. Adrian looked at the mother and daughter, his gaze softening. In the still wet yard, the light reflected brightly, the light of a new beginning, warm and peaceful. In life, some rains do not come to punish, but to wash away all mistakes, so that when the sun emerges, we know to cherish every small ray of light remaining in our hearts. After the storm last night, where Maya was rescued and Adrian confronted betrayal, a rare peaceful morning settled over St. Clair Institute. She was brought into the clinic for a health check and stayed overnight for observation. The pale, pure sunlight shone through her room window, warming the white space. The next morning, Maya was better, but the nurse advised her to rest. While she was still resting, Adrian brought Lila to visit her. Lila, with her curly hair and big round eyes, carried a vibrant drawing of a sunflower. This was the first time Lila had interacted closely with Adrian since the Le Papon incident, but the little girl showed no fear. Lila ran over, hugged her mother, then turned to Adrian, calling him Uncle Adrian. Adrian sat down beside the hospital bed, the awkwardness of a wealthy man who had never cared for anyone seeping into his every movement. He held Lila's small hand, watched her smile, and then looked at Maya. It was then that he clearly saw the image of the woman he had been afraid to lose and wanted to care for. Maya no longer carried the weariness or fear from Le Papon, only the composure and gentleness of a mother. He realized that his cruelty had failed to destroy this quality. Maya was discharged. She returned to the St. Clair garden, pruning the lavender bushes that the rain had damaged. The gentle scent permeated the air. Adrian approached. He no longer had the hurried appearance of Manhattan. He held 2 paper cups of coffee, the kind he never thought he would buy himself. "First time I've bought coffee without an assistant," he said, his voice tinged with humor. Maya looked up at him. "And the first time I've seen you without a watch." "Adrian," he smiled, a genuine smile. The luxurious watch was now just a symbol of his old burden. He placed the coffee on the stone bench and sat down next to her. The atmosphere between them was light as a breath. Adrian's new life began slowly at St. Clair. He spent time at the institute every day, not just to check on Bernard, but to do manual labor. He helped the elderly play chess, awkwardly repainting the wooden benches outside. Maya took on additional administrative work at the institute, caring for patients while helping Mr. Billionaire of the Stowe Y. Bernard read old files. The two worked side by side, not speaking much, only small, warm exchanges. "Do you realize this?" Maya asked one afternoon, as Adrian was reading a newspaper to a visually impaired elderly man. "You always bow your head, slightly leaning in, when you talk to the elderly here." Adrian paused, reflecting. "They deserve to be looked at directly, Maya, or to have us bend down to listen to them, not look down on them." A few weeks later, Adrian met with his lawyer, Daniel Cooper, in a small, modest office, much simpler than his former office. "I don't want to go back to the CEO chair, Daniel. Let the shareholders find someone else suitable for the old world," Adrian said. "I want to establish the St. Clair Foundation, using my personal assets to help those who have been treated unfairly in the service industry, especially those who don't dare to speak up." Daniel stared at him. "Are you sure?" "Adrian, this is the hardest way to make money. You are voluntarily withdrawing from the peak." Adrian shrugged. "But it's the easiest way to sleep at night. I don't have to worry about who will stab me in the back anymore." That afternoon, Adrian found Maya in the lavender garden. The foundation needs a leader with the right direction, someone who knows what kindness is. "I need someone to oversee that fund." Maya cut a lavender branch. She knew he was hinting at her. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be the executive director," Adrian said, "and more importantly, I want you to teach me how to treat people, starting with my staff. I need your authenticity." Maya hesitated. She looked down at the ground. "I don't believe money can fix mistakes, Adrian, especially a billionaire's money." He smiled. gently. I don't believe it either. But I believe kindness can start anew, in the hands of those who have been hurt. You are living proof. A few months later, the launch of the St. Clair Foundation was held formally, but warmly. Adrian Westwood stood on the podium, not as the arrogant CEO, but as the founder. He recounted his story, his voice deep and genuine. Once, he said, looking straight at the audience, a waitress told me I could buy everything on the menu, but I could not buy kindness. I called her a nobody. Today, I stand here, having lost many things, to prove her right. Kindness is priceless, and that is what we will protect. The crowd was silent. Then applause erupted, strong and lasting. Maya sat in the front row with Lila, bowing her head and smiling. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Lila ran up and hugged Adrian. The little girl completely trusting this. Uncle, Maya watched them from afar. She quietly said to Daniel, the lawyer, some people don't need to be forgiven. Daniel, they just need a chance to live better. And he took it. The evening sky was warm yellow. Adrian and Maya walked out into the courtyard together. Small, dry lavender petals gently fell around them, carrying the scent of healing and rebirth. A year had passed since everything unraveled. The St. Clair Foundation Center officially opened, expanding from the old nursing home into a community support and service staff training center, focusing on the value of kindness. Adrian stood in the large hall, preparing for the final press conference of the day. Maya walked up to him, her hand adjusting Adrian's tie. Do you know how to knot it yourself yet? She teased, a warm smile on her lips. Adrian laughed, taking her hand. I could hire someone to teach me, but with you here, why bother? They both chuckled. Lila, now 6 years old, stood behind them, holding up a bright sunflower drawing, symbolizing brightness. In the auditorium, Adrian stood on the podium to speak. His voice was steady, no longer arrogant, only the humility of someone who had stumbled. I once called someone a nobody, simply because I couldn't see value beyond money. But that person taught me, kindness never lowers anyone. It is the real strength. The applause was long. The camera panned to the front row, where Maya and Lila sat. Maya bowed her head, smiling, her eyes shining with silent pride. She didn't need to stand on the podium. Her role was confirmed by the change in this man. After the ceremony, Adrian and Maya walked together through the back garden of the center, where the old nursing home courtyard once was. You kept your promise, Maya said, looking at the blooming lavender bushes. You truly live kindly. Adrian shook his head. Not yet. I still learn every day. And I will learn for the rest of my life. I heard Tina say, you found a new apartment in Long Island City to be closer to your work. Adrian paused, turning to look at her. Are you planning to leave me in St. Clair? She asked. He stepped closer, taking her hand. If possible, I want you to stay not to work, but to live with me, to care for this place with me, to raise Lila with me. They walked together to a small corner of the garden, where Adrian and Lila had spent hours cleaning and planting. Adrian knelt down, his hands covered in dirt, no longer wearing gloves. Maya saw him teaching Lila how to plant new lavender bushes. Maya looked over, softly saying, you know, lavender only blooms again when the soil is properly cared for, without rushing. People are the same. He nodded, wiping a smudge of dirt from Lila's cheek, his eyes full of sincerity. And you are the one who watered my barren soil back to life. The sunset descended, bathing the garden in warm yellow. Adrian gently pulled Maya toward a quiet little corner, where Mr. Bernard used to sit and watch the rain. There was no fanfare, no crowd or cameras. Adrian looked straight into Maya's eyes, which reflected sincerity and peace. He took out a small box, not a flashy diamond ring box, but a simple wooden one that Lila had helped him decorate. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with the small inscription, "Be kind first." I know, I'm not the man I used to be. I can't buy you a perfect life, or guarantee no storms. But I promise to live a life of kindness with you. Maya, he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Will you help me manage my life? Forever. Maya looked at the ring, looked into his sincere eyes, and then looked at Lila laughing nearby. She didn't need an apology. She needed an action. She nodded, tears welling up. Yes, Adrian, I will. The three of them walked hand in hand through the garden. Lila laughed. Mommy, Uncle Adrian says this flower will bloom forever if we don't neglect it. Maya replied, hugging Lila and Adrian tightly. Then we won't neglect it. A gentle breeze blew, the lavender flowers swaying in the sunlight. The final voiceover softly narrated, there are some mistakes that cannot be erased, but they can bloom. If we are brave enough to tend to ourselves again, and lucky enough to find someone to care for that garden with us. Every warm glass of water, every seemingly meaningless word in a luxurious restaurant, ultimately became the start of a journey that changed a person completely. Adrian lost his reputation, his power, everything he once thought was strength, only to learn how to listen to a simple truth. Kindness never comes from perfection, but from sincerity. And Maya, the woman who was humiliated in public, did not seek revenge with hatred, but by continuing to live true to her heart, that very quality made her a mirror, reflecting the human part Adrian had forgotten. This story, perhaps, is not just about a wealthy man learning to regret, but about all of us, those who sometimes strive so hard to prove our worth that we forget that just one kind word is enough to change someone's entire day. This world does not need more perfect people, but needs more people who know how to bend down, listen, and correct their mistakes. If you have ever been hurt by contempt, or have hurt someone without realizing it, I hope this story reminds you, it is never too late to start over, even with a small act, because sometimes the kindness you sow today will be where you find peace tomorrow. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. If this story made you think of someone or yourself, please leave a comment. I would love to hear it, because who knows, the next story might be yours.